At first he was like presented himself pretty well.
I mean, they'd known each other for so long, I felt like we all knew him, really. I think I always had a gut feeling, and I should have listened.
It's still a struggle because I have a piece of me missing.
Hi, welcome back to #DeadToMe, the interviews. I am Dr. Doro Townshend. This week, we're speaking to the family of Ashley Wadsworth, who was killed by her boyfriend Jack Sepple.
I'm gonna kill her. I'm gonna murder her.
Ashley was only 12 when she started talking to 15-year-old Jack Sepple on the internet.
I did have some concerns, but I honestly didn't think they'd ever meet.
In November of 2021, Ashley decides to fly to the UK to spend her gap year with Jack.
At first he was like presented himself pretty well.
I mean, they'd known each other for so long, I felt like we all knew him, really.
Jack Sepple has a long history of violence against women that Ashley and her family knew nothing about.
This my lip.
She was trying, obviously, to protect the relationship, protect him. Yeah, because I don't think she wanted me or her father to know.
During the pandemic, lots of domestic violence victims were trapped with their abusers. Christy and Hayley were doing everything they could to try and get Ashley home, but she couldn't fly until she got a COVID test. And so she's trapped with a violent man who knows that she is trying to leave him.
I called her and I said, we're gonna book you a flight. Okay, you're coming home. And I looked and he was there too, and I said, that's enough. I'm done. This is over and you're coming home.
On February 1st of 2022, Jack Sepple subjected Ashley to a prolonged attack. She is stabbed 90 times and strangled by him.
The police called and asked me to give an identification, like what she looked like, and I said just blue eyes, fair skin, long brown hair. And I said her passport's in there, so she has IDs. And she said, I think we have your daughter. I think we found a body. I'm sorry, but it's your daughter.
I'm joined now by Christy Gendron, who is on the line from British Columbia. Christy, a huge thank you for joining me today and talking about your daughter Ashley. Just to start with, can you talk me through how it was that Ashley met Jack and how that relationship started?
They met on Facebook through a mutual friend. Ashley has a friend that had him on her Facebook, and yeah, so that's how they were just friends for the first bit, I'd say year and a half, just talking. And yeah, she was pretty young, and so they were just chatting.
Yeah, because am I right that she was 12 at the time? So, very innocent, sort of blossoming online friendship at the time.
Yeah, like talking about video games yes, it wasn't serious. It wasn't dating, I'd say, until grade 10, like when she was 16.
Mm-hmm. And how much did you know about Jack or know Jack before Ashley came to the UK to visit?
I had talked to him a few times. They'd be on the phone and she'd be like, Mom, say hi to Jack. And I'd be like, oh, hi, Jack. And we'd talk about England, and I liked his accent, and his mom would be in the background saying, oh, hi, Christy. Like they kind of grew up together. Because at first, when they first started talking and I found out, I'm like, whoa, what if this guy is a 40-year-old behind a computer? So that's where I said, I'd like to meet him, like online, face to face. So I did. And his mother, Tracy, was in the background. I said, okay. And okay, you're young. He showed me his ID, school ID. I'm like, perfect. Thank you. And he's like, do you want the birth certificate? I'm like, well, you have it. I laughed, but so that's kind of that was my first concern. Then finding out that he's, 2.5 years older, but she was always around me. She didn't have her own like iPhone where they could FaceTime or WhatsApp. Like she would just kind of on the laptop or iPad just to kind of talk to him through Facebook.
And do you think that, because obviously they were talking for such a long time before ever meeting, and, you know, you're saying that there was communication between both you and his mother, and, you know, you're all sort of familiar with one another at least. Do you think that perhaps led to a bit of a false sense of security for Ashley?
Definitely. I think it was false insecurity for all of us because Tracy was there and I knew, and like she was so nice. She was so excited for Ashley to come. So she would leave messages and Ashley would play them for me. So she'd leave them because of the time difference. So Ashley would wake up and be like, oh, listen. And she'd be like, in her, well, it's not an accent to you guys, but to us. And it would be like, oh, hello, Ashley. I just dropped off a dressing robe at Jack's. And oh, I got you a teacup and I bought you some toiletries. And I were so excited. Like she really couldn't wait for Ashley. She wanted Ashley to go earlier at 16 or I'd offered. I said, oh, no. Ashley, if Ashley wants to go one day, she'll be an adult and that's her decision. But until then, that's a no.
I've got a bit of a hard question for you, but I just wanted to ask at what point you learned about Jack's history of violence.
Not till the court.
Mm-hmm.
Now looking back, like she hit a lot, like the voicemail, he laughed. Like I had never heard that. And no offense to her friends to hide that he was already that jealous when she was living here. Because if I would have heard that yelling, I would have asked more questions to Tracy maybe, or I would have done a bit more research on him. I tried to look him up just to see a record if he did go to jail, but there was nothing.
Yeah,
So
I mean, you know, it's also acknowledging that they were both teenagers. So you know, as you're saying, whether Ashley would have come to you about everything and whether friends would have known the potential severity of it as well, it can be a really difficult situation all around.
definitely. And she wouldn't want to, she'd shut me down if I did try to say stuff. And sadly enough, like before she would go, I'm like, and I was totally joking, but it's really sad now. But I'm like, what if he's like Jack the Ripper? Like, I'm just worried. She's like, oh, stop with your, I'm like, okay, I know I shouldn't say, and she would get mad. So I'd be like, oh, she's like, Mom, that's so mean. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know. I was just worried. I'm like, you're an adult, you know, I can't stop you, but you're far away.
Do you think maybe the online nature of their initially friendship and then dating also kind of gave Jack a potential to, you know, filter what it was that Ashley saw of him?
Oh, definitely. That's the perfect way, isn't it? To groom someone or to, yes, and to start controlling little things like I could see now looking back. Yeah, that's definitely. And she wouldn't want me to know stuff, and you could hide stuff, and he wouldn't want us to know. Clearly,
In your opinion, would you now, when looking back, say that this was an instance of grooming?
yes. She would get home from school, maybe go on the laptop for a bit and then give it back, or and I would always kind of be in ears and listen. Like if I heard anything weird, or then I would have jumped in. But they really started talking privately more, definitely around 16. And by then, I think she was already filled with his lies and how great. Yeah, he was convincing her to come for a long time, trying to get her.
Can I ask as well, just a little bit about the signs that you started to see in Ashley? What did you start to notice about how her behavior was changing?
So I did notice, like before she left, that there was like maybe, I don't know exact dates, but a little part of a year before, like she was crying and wouldn't go out as much. And she's like, well, I just don't want him to be mad because I'm planning on going there. This is during COVID. That's when they really started talking a lot because she wasn't at school or work because you were on lockdown. So I noticed a bit of a change there. And then definitely when she got there, it was great at first because that was my first concern. And then it went really good. So they were going to places. And then I started hearing from her less. And the conversations were getting shut down shorter. And if I was asking stuff about the relationships or like expressing concerns, like, what do you guys do all day? Like, you must be so bored. Like, he doesn't work. And she kind of shut it down and be like, Mom, stop. He's right here. Like, I was like, oh, okay. Sorry. I'm concerned. But I did notice starting stuff like that. And then when I heard he had that suicide attempt, then I'm like, Ashley, that's when we started saying, maybe it's time to come home. And knowing now that's the first time he had beat her, because I found that in her Snapchat. Those bruises, I didn't know about those till after she passed. We got into her Snapchat. It's the only thing he didn't change that we can get into. And she had filmed her bruises. That happened on, I believe, the 28th, like 26th or 28th. And he did the suicide attempt right after that. Because I think she wanted to leave then. She was probably getting scared. And that's what they do. And knowing Ashley, who she is to help you, she loved him. And I don't want to leave him because if I do, then he'll kill himself.
Yeah, clearly another manipulation tactic from Jack there. Before, you mentioned COVID, how their relationship really sort of amped up during COVID. And I know that COVID really played a significant role in this, both in relation to Ashley being able to travel, as well as being able to bring her home afterwards.
Yeah, what's COVID? So you had to have all the testing. You had to have this app to make sure that they could see the airport security, all the testing stuff. COVID changed a lot. And then trying to get her home when that final 2 days, we had to book a flight. We couldn't get it for 2 days. And she had to get a COVID test before she could get to the airport, before she even went to the airport. So that was tough because we're trying to get her home. She's realizing it's not working out. And he knew, and he was right there. And I thought, this is over. So you're coming home. And I thought, okay, now he knows. I know. Now he's surely not going to touch her or do anything. Because he's like, yeah, I'm like, this is done. Or I'm calling the police. And he's like, oh, yeah, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to take a nap. You go because it was the middle of the night. And I had just worked. I'm like, I'm going to get a couple hours sleep. Go get that COVID test now and pack. And we'll call you when we get out. And then we tried to call and she didn't answer. But that was tough because if not for COVID, everything would have maybe ran a bit smoother. Like, just pack your stuff, get to the airport, just sit there until your flight, even if it takes 2 days, like just sit in the airport.
And I mean, we also know, more generally speaking, that during COVID, there was a significant increase in domestic abuse, domestic violence, both in terms of how often it was happening, the severity to which it was happening, and as shown here, the methods in which people could reach out for help are very much restricted because the abuser would know, they would hear. And I know you mentioned just now that you felt that it would be more safe for Ashley because now you were aware, he was aware that you knew, and it would be safe. But obviously we know that there can be trigger points in abusive relationships when the victim of the abuse may try to end that relationship. So how's that something that you were able to navigate, especially from so far away?
It was hard to navigate all that. Like, that's the most dangerous time. I know that now for an abuser to take their partner's life is when they're losing control. So that day, the morning for him, he knew he was losing her because he knew if she came back here, she would never go back. And him going through her phone and deleting stuff, finding old messages that she had of friends, guy friends, just friends, and flipping out about it. Now looking, that's a very dangerous time. And it was really hard to book the flight, plan all that. She's over there. I'm thinking the neighbors are involved. Like, I don't know what I was thinking. Clearly, to look back, I should have just phoned the police and said, just go get her out of there. But I'm like, oh no, she has to get that COVID test.
Well, you weren't to know the potential severity of Jack. And as you said as well, you weren't aware of his previous history of violence.
It's really, you see this on TV, you watch Dateline or watch these shows, true crime, and you never think it's going to happen to your child, ever. And I never did. And it did happen.
Christy, in the UK, there is Clare's Law, and Clare's Law was set up in memory of a young woman called Clare who lost her life to an abusive boyfriend. Now, Clare's Law obviously allows people to request information when either they themselves or a loved one or even a neighbour or someone local they believe is at risk of domestic violence. And it does allow for potential gathering of information about someone's criminal history. And I was going to ask on that, I know that you've spoken about difficulty of being able to even access Clare's law in your situation from British Columbia, with Ashley being over in the UK. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Claire's law, and thank God for Claire Wood's parents who got this going, because it is a start. But with the global world the way it is now, it's a totally different world that we have to look at. Not protecting these perpetrators, like in their history. I think if you have violence, stalking, or any behavior like that in a relationship, that should be, you've given up your right to privacy. So if someone asks from far away, like I'd have to get that in person at Claire's Law. Ashley would have to go in person with him right beside her. Oh, I'm just going to go out for a bit and go and apply for that. And I don't think she would have, because young love, like, and I know a family member can ask for that if they're concerned too, but you have to go. They will only give it to you in person. And I'm just starting to think that I wish, at least between the major countries, like the Five Eyes, like I've said, Canada, US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, could share some data. Like, I don't think we should protect these men. And if you've done this a few times, like if you're a perpetrator of a violent act against someone, then I think that should be public knowledge.
And perhaps the key as well, because you were mentioning, prior to this, you hadn't even been aware of Claire's Law. So maybe, the real key is as well highlighting that, internationally.
Mm-hmm. Yes, awareness.
Can I ask just a bit about what your interactions were like with police, with the justice system, and what issues you encountered during that?
The police were wonderful. Of course, we had to have our death notification over the phone. So, I mean, stuff like that is difficult with time. Time differences is always tricky, but they were wonderful. Our liaison officer was wonderful. But getting her home, her body, was a nightmare of paperwork and bureaucracy. You don't realize to fly a body how much paperwork there is to like repatriate someone. It's unreal. You don't think about those things. Ashley wanted to be buried, and I had to see her. My passport expired, so her father went down to go make sure that's her. Like, we knew, but I wanted someone to be with her because she was alone. So you have your child at a funeral home alone. By the time she got here, due to the flights, there were changes that were made to her because you don't think about that, but a body flying and the pressure in the cabin and go, because you had to transfer her body a couple times, like so all this stuff, it's the worst nightmare you can imagine. It was a lot, but when she flew in and I knew they landed, it was just like a relief to get her home, because I was so scared, like, that we wouldn't, because it took 3 weeks, but they rushed it. And WestJet was amazing that flew her. They covered the cost, because it would have been $80,000 to $100,000.
And this feels like another point that could be raised for changing policies, because you're talking about how much paperwork, the potential costs involved, and this really shouldn't be a barrier, to be able to get your loved one home after you've tragically lost them.
Yes. We had a great community support, but that's just another thing that you don't realize, that when they're leaving, that's how they can come home in these type of relationships. So that's why I say, if you have a gut feeling as a parent, and I did, trust your gut. Please just call the police, get them out of there. and do your research on them and ask the tough questions. I didn't ask his mom the tough questions early on. Had she have told me the truth, I don't know. And I didn't ask Jack the really tough questions. I mean, he promised me to take care of her. He promised with his life, and Ashley had lost her life. So
So your final note to other families and parents of people potentially in these situations is to ask the tough questions.
yes, ask the tough questions. Trust your gut. I had it all the weekend before. I had this weird gut feeling like something wasn't right. And that's when I finally, and Haley told me everything. And I said, that's it. But I should have, now knowing as soon, that's the most dangerous time. So as soon as they're leaving and they've decided, yes, I'm coming home, that's the most critical time for them. So call the police right away to get them out of there and deal with it, everything after. Like, they could escort her out, get her suitcase out, But as soon as we hung up the phone, he had made that decision. I don't know if I would have been quick enough either way, but at least it probably could have saved her. So I learned a really tough lesson, and I'll have that guilt for the rest of my life.
Christy, I just want to thank you again for joining us today, for sharing more about Ashley. I know that it's been a really hard conversation, and I really hope that being involved in this is doing exactly that, in raising awareness for future potential people who may be in this situation.
Yes. Be careful and beware. Definitely.
Thank you so much for your time, Christy. I really appreciate you joining.
Thank you.
So Christy was talking a bit about Clare's Law. So just for a bit of context, I'll give you an overview of what Clare's Law is. So Clare's Law is also known as the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, and it's essentially a police policy that gives people the right to know if their current or ex-partner has any previous history of violence or abuse. So the scheme is actually named after a young woman called Clare Wood, because she was murdered by her abusive ex-boyfriend in 2009. And it was rolled out in England and Wales in 2014 after a landmark campaign led by Clare's father, Michael Brown. And Clare's Law essentially means that you have the right to apply to the police requesting information about either a current or ex-partner because you're worried that they might have been abusive or that they pose a risk to you in the future. And you can also request that information about the current or ex-partner of a close friend, a neighbour, a family member, because you're concerned that they might be at risk of domestic abuse. Joining me now is Rebecca Mason. Rebecca is a detective in the police and has worked in domestic abuse teams along with many others. Now, Rebecca, how important has it been, the introduction of Clare's Law?
I'll be honest, not a lot of people know about it. So it's really key that you're bringing this up now, because people need to understand it is something that is available to them. And I'm not saying anyone with a previous domestic violence history can't be reformed, but I think you need all the information if you are going into a relationship with someone new that potentially could have quite a damning history of violence against people they're in a relationship with.
And I know that was some of the controversy when Clare's Law was being implemented, right, was around this idea of right to privacy, and if it
Of course.
challenged the idea of rehabilitation because that information would be available. But ultimately it was implemented because it was decided that people have the right to know and to do with that knowledge what they decide to.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think everyone has the right to know who they're sharing their home with potentially, and who they are sharing their life with. And as you rightly said, no one is sort of being able to be reformed after that. But surely if you're living in that much of a close proximity to someone with what could potentially be quite a nasty history of domestic violence, you need to be aware of that. So any flags that you may have early on in a relationship that you're not sure about, I would always recommend applying to your local police force and applying for the Clare's Law disclosure. If there is nothing there, might I add, that's not to say that this person doesn't have a history. It's just a history that hasn't been reported, and I can't stress that enough.
That is one of the concerns, isn't it? Because obviously so much domestic abuse, domestic violence kind of goes under the radar without being reported or officially recorded at the very least.
Absolutely. Absolutely, but at least this is in place for the public safety, and for the victim's safety. This is why it is there.
So, in your role as a detective, do you often see in cases of domestic violence repeat offenders?
To be honest, yes, I do. It is really, really common, and like I say, I've said it once, I'll say it again. I'm not saying that anyone is unrehabilitable. I'm sure that's the word. That there is rehabilitation there for someone, but you will find that the pattern repeats over and over again, different victim, because that is who the person is.
I think we see that a lot in the literature, this idea that in the vast majority of incidents, there's going to be a prior history of abuse,
Yes,
either to the same level or to a lower level, but it's a repetitive pattern that plays out in relationships. And that can be why it's so important to have access to something like Clare's Law.
absolutely. It is there for a reason, and we need to be using it more.
Thank you, Rebecca. And am I right as well in hearing that you've had some personal experience with Clare's Law? Are you comfortable talking about that?
I can say a bit. The key thing is with any Clare's Law disclosure is that you can't talk about it. So the police will come out and they will tell you. And the key is you cannot tell the perpetrator that you know. You certainly can't tell friends and family. That is part of the disclosure in order to protect the human rights of that person.
Mm-hmm.
But I can say that, yes, I have personally had to use it. And it was helpful for me. And I'm a police officer, and it wasn't something that immediately came to my mind even when I initially started a previous relationship and I had to have the disclosure.
Well, and
that's
that
what I
really
can say.
shows, yeah, it really shows the importance of the accessibility and the availability of Clare's Law, and also the importance
Absolutely.
of promoting its existence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if it's anyone that's listening to this that potentially is a victim of domestic violence, all I'll say is that I have been there as a police officer. So it's nothing that you are doing. It's nothing that the victims do. These perpetrators are very good at what they do. So I'll just leave it on that one, I think.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for talking to us. I really appreciate your insight professionally and personally.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You've been listening to #Dead to Me, a First Look TV podcast series produced by Caitlin Hanrahan and presented by me, Honor Doro Townshend.